right, now I have, this is my row of tomato plants, and I've also got tomato plants in the buckets up here, but I have 3 different kinds, and there's 3 different ways to go. Now this is a regular determinate tomato, and here's what you got to know. This is the main stalk, and this is a leaf. This here, that's a sucker. Now, let me tell you why you prune the suckers off. And there's another little tiny one, I don't even know if you can see it, but anywhere there's a joint between a leaf and a stem, see there's a little bitty one starting there, so you can just pull him off. It's not hard. If they're bigger, you can use a clipper or trimmer, pruner. All right, here's the reason that you want to trim them and why you might want single stem tomatoes. Okay, this tomato will keep growing, and everywhere that there's a leaf stalk, in between the leaf stalk and the main stem will be one of those suckers start. Now, these are different from the blooms. You see this cluster of blooms here on the side that's just getting ready to go? Right there on the right of that stalk, okay? That's not in the corner between a leaf stalk and the main stem. So it's not hard to tell what's a bloom, what's going to be a bloom, and what's a sucker. All right, here's why you want to do it. This tomato will keep growing. It'll grow all summer long and it'll get way tall. And between every leaf stalk and the main stalk will pop up another sucker. This is a non-determinate tomato. It's a vining tomato. All right, now, but each one of those suckers is going to be another growing point for that tomato. That sucker will have its own leaf stalks, it'll have its own growing tip, and it'll put out its own blooms. But you got to look at it and say, but wait a minute, I only got one main stem. If it's feeding 15 growing points, how are they all going to have enough moisture to put on nice tomatoes? Well, fact is they're not. So if you're growing a non-determinate tomato, that's what you need to think about. I want to take and I want to get rid of those suckers, and that's going to let each cluster of fruit that comes on get the most it can get to grow and to be produced. Then I can pick them and we move on. Move on up the stem to the next step, the next bunch of growing tomatoes. So that's pruning suckers on an indeterminate tomato. We'll move over here to the next one. Because you see here is a great big one. I'm trying to get things. This is the leaf off to the side here. There's the stem. That is a big sucker. And you just pull him off, like so. Now, if you're a mind to, if you're in a part of the country where you can, you could stick that thing in the ground and keep it really watered really good. And that'll actually make another tomato plant. And it'll be just the exact copy of the tomato plant you pulled it off. Now here, this is a good one. This is a huge sucker, okay? Because you can see the main stem. It's hard to do this talk, think, point the camera all at once. All right, that's the main stem. That's a leaf stalk. That is a huge sucker. So, clipping him off, taking him off there. Because these 2 tomato plants, and these are Golden Jubilee, one of my favorites. I want big tomatoes. I want them to develop one cluster at a time. There's a couple more while I'm talking. I'll pick them off, get rid of them. Now, you don't have to do it exactly like I'm doing. Let's say you say to yourself, I don't care, I don't want tiny tomatoes, but I don't care about huge ones. But what I want to do is get the most pounds of tomato I can get. What would I do? Okay, here's an idea that I saw somebody do on YouTube. What they did was they allowed it to have that first sucker, that huge one I just trimmed off with scissors, and then that was all. So it had 2 growing tips, it was putting out twice as many blooms, but it still wasn't overpowering the stem. It still wasn't more than what the plant could produce. And they said they thought they still got decent sized tomatoes, but they didn't get, you know, to a point where the plant was overgrown and bushy and you were getting a whole bunch of little bitty ones. And they thought they got the most pounds out of that tomato plant they could get, and they very well may be right. All right, now let's move on. Okay, now this plant is a determinate. And a determinate tomato is basically this. And he's a little bowed right here because it got breezy and windy and that one got blowed down. Now I'm pulling it back up with a piece of string. It'll be okay, but it just looks a little funny right this second. Determinates do not continue to vine all summer. They get however big they're going to get, and they have all their tomatoes, and then the plant dies. Okay? Determinants are wonderful for a lot of things. Sometimes you get tomatoes quicker and earlier in your garden with a determinant, depending on the variety. And you have to research that. You have to look at your catalogs, and look up varieties, and see what you want to do. See what's going to give you the best thing. But anyway, they're great if you want all your tomatoes at once. You want a whole bunch of tomatoes over a reasonably short period of time, and then you want to can them, say. Well, then you would want determinate tomatoes in your garden for that. Okay? I plant these because I have 2 of these, because gee whiz, they've just been good little producers, and they're kind of a they kind of last longer. But anyway, as to pruning, a determinate you don't prune. In the first place, they don't get hugely tall. They just go so far, that's it, they mature, they have their tomatoes, and they're done. So you don't prune them. If you did, you're just limiting how many tomatoes you're going to get. It's not going to give you any more or any bigger. You're just not going to get as many. So that's the second kind of tomato and the second pruning strategy. With these, you don't prune them. If you get a determinate tomato, like say a patio tomato, they're a determinate. They're not made to vine on forever. They're made to have a few tomatoes on the edge of your patio, and then they're done. So that's that. Now we're going to go on. I've got 2 of these plants. Now we're going to go on to the last variety. Now, this is a cherry tomato. This is that sun sugar, I believe. I forget exactly what the name is, but you get the idea. All right, now this is a cherry tomato. They are non-determinate, but cherry tomatoes are different. The tomatoes don't get very big, so it could have 4 or 5 clusters of tomatoes going at once, and it'd be just fine, and it could fill them all out. So how would I want to prune that? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I've got a bamboo stick here, and it's not hugely tall, but it's pretty good. I'm going to let it grow to the top of the bamboo stick, and I'll probably end up with 2 or 3 other sticks around it, supporting leaves that are hanging out or stems that are hanging out. I'm going to let it get to the top of the stick, trim it off, cut that growing tip at the top of the stick. Then, as it progresses through the summer, the suckers that were further down on the plant are going to also grow up to that height, and they'll keep having tomatoes too. And then the suckers will produce suckers. So with this cherry tomato, I can hold it to a height that's easy to handle and not hanging down and being in the way. And with tomatoes, okay, tomatoes get blight. So you want tomatoes to have a good amount of space. And if you look at mine, I've got probably 2.5 feet between each plant. You want them to have a lot of space. If it rains, you want it to really be able to dry out quickly and easily. Mulch on the ground, which I do anyway, always, for a whole lot of reasons. But it's particularly necessary with tomatoes because it keeps bacteria and funguses from the soil from splashing up on the plant when it rains. So that's it. With this, trim it off when you're happy with the height, and then as it goes through the summer, suckers that come off the sides, they'll grow on up too. They'll keep having tomatoes. The suckers will have suckers, and so on. So you can just keep a cherry tomato to a handy height, trim to a neat where you can handle it, where it gets ventilation, where you can support it easily, and that's it. Now, I'm going to give you a quick look at some buckets. Okay, lettuce, huge. I'm sure it'll start bolting. This is the bush squash. You look at the stem, it's got all kinds of buds. It's just going to be blooming all over itself any minute. I'm surprised it doesn't have a bloom open yet, but it's doing fantastic. And this bucket, I'm going to have to separate these somewhat. These are cucumbers. And those three plants are just doing fantastic. I got one on each main leg of this tomato cage. They're blooming. These two, they're kind of so overgrown it's kind of hard to see. In the back of the bucket is this tomato. You can see the tomato blooms up here. I believe these are the first ones, well, second ones to bloom. Cherry tomato bloomed first. But they're supposed to be a bush variety tomato, which is like a determinate. So I'm not trying to trim them. I've just got them in these little cages in this bucket. And the sugar snap peas are just hanging out all over the place. I've had to prop them up a couple of different times because they've just gotten huge. But so far I haven't really seen any peas yet. You know, I've seen a few blooms, and I'm sure they should pretty shortly have all their peas and fizzle out. So okay, that's a quick outline of the buckets. There we are. Well, that's pruning tomatoes 3 different ways. And I'm going to apologize. It was a little difficult to coordinate the camera and my hands and tell you what I wanted to tell you all at the same time. So if there's something I didn't cover quite right or a question you have, please ask it in the comments. All right, thank you. Have a good day. Have a quality day.